Imagine a royal wedding, a really spectacular one, designed specifically to bring a fractured nation together, to seal a peace after years of just brutal religious war. You can almost picture it, right? The ceremony, the celebrations, maybe a sense of hope, finally. But what if that very event, instead of reconciliation, just lit a match? Turned this moment of unity into one of history's most chilling periods of violence. That's what we're diving into today. The infamous wedding of Margaret of Valois and Henry of Navarre. We'll look at the Queen Mother, Catherine de Medici, her complicated role, the absolute horror of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre that followed, and even a painting that tries to capture that chilling aftermath. It's a moment that really, it changed everything. Layers of politics, ambition, shocking violence. So yeah, let's unpack this.
Okay, so to really get this, when you go back to 16th century France, it's a kingdom just constantly torn apart. Civil wars, religious wars. Catholics versus the Calvinist Protestants, who were called Huguenots, the ruling dynasty, the Valois. They were really struggling.
Just trying to keep control in this incredibly tense time.
And right in the middle of all this, you have Catherine de Medici, a major figure. She was queen and this incredibly powerful queen mother. I mean, some historians call her the most important woman in Europe in the 16th century. That gives you some idea. Her main goal, well, it seems pretty clear. Keep the House of Valois on the throne. Simple as that, but incredibly complex to achieve. So she did try compromising with the Huguenots sometimes, make concessions, but it looks like her understanding was more political, not really about theology. Her policies often seem like, pragmatic, almost desperate moves to keep power rather than deep religious belief driving them.
Right, that desperation, that pragmatism for survival that leads her to this grand plan, marriage. Let's unite the Valois and the Bourbon families. Her daughter, Margaret of Valois, marries Henry of Navarre, who's the Protestant leader. Definitely not a love match. It was meant to be purely strategic, a political tool for peace, trying to stitch France back together across this huge religious divide.
And these individuals were significant. Margaret, born in 1553, daughter of King Henry II and Catherine herself. Very well educated, intelligent, apparently skilled in languages, writing, even horsemanship and dance. And Henry, also born in 1553, King of Navarre, a key Huguenot figure. So for Margaret, despite the Medici family's, origins and wealth, marrying into the Bourbon line, especially Henry, was seen as a big deal, a prize catch, you could say, for stability.
But wow, the reaction. It caused an absolute uproar. This was not universally popular, not at all. Pope Gregory XIII, he flat out refused to grant the dispensation needed. That's the church's special permission, right?
Exactly. Needed for a Catholic to marry a non-Catholic. And without it, the French clergy were hesitant, unsure what to do.
So the divide was just massive. On the wedding day itself, Henry, being Protestant, actually had to stay outside Notre Dame during the Mass.
Yeah, can you imagine? His place inside was taken by Margaret's brother. It's such a stark image of how divided the country was, even at the very top.
It really is. And speaking of images and stories, there's that anecdote about Margaret agreeing to the marriage.
Ah, yes, the forced nod.
Right. This story, apparently invented later in the 17th century by a historian named Massacre, claims King Charles IX physically pushed her head down to make her nod yes. But, and this is crucial, if you read Margaret's own memoirs or other accounts from the time, nothing, no mention of it.
Which really suggests it was likely later propaganda, probably Bourbon propaganda, trying to justify annulling the marriage decades down the line.
Exactly. It shows how history gets written and rewritten. Always need to check those sources.
Definitely. And this kind of political maneuvering was happening against this backdrop of just intense tension in Paris before the wedding. On August 18th, 1572, thousands of Protestants, Huguenot nobles, had come to the city for the wedding. And Paris was fiercely anti-Huguenot. Catholic preachers were actually condemning the marriage from the pulpit. You could just feel it simmering.
And it wasn't just religion causing resentment. There were so many other factors. Bad harvest meant food prices were up, taxes were higher. And there was this recent controversy over removing an open-air cross that had already led to riots and deaths among Catholics. They were furious. So you throw this incredibly lavish, expensive royal wedding into that mix while ordinary people are struggling. It just inflamed everything, a real powder keg situation.
And the court itself, deeply divided. The powerful Catholic Guise family, they were actually out of favor at that specific moment. Meanwhile, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the big Huguenot leader, he'd been brought back into the King's Council, which, didn't sit well with Catholics. Plus, he had rivalries, like between the Duke of Guise and the Duke of Montmorency. So it wasn't just religion, it was this complex mess of politics, economics, personal feuds all bubbling up.
And then came the spark. August 22nd, 1572. Just 4 days after the wedding bells, Admiral de Coligny is walking back from the Louvre, and someone tries to assassinate him, shoots him from a window.
He's wounded, seriously wounded, but he survives the initial shot. The shooter gets away. But that attempt on Coligny's life, that's what lit the fuse.
Everything explodes after that.
So the immediate question is, who was behind it? Who ordered the hit on Coligny? Well, there are a few main theories. The Guises are one possibility, seeking revenge for their father's assassination years earlier, and the shot did come from a house linked to them.
Makes sense.
Another theory points to the Duke of Alba governing the Netherlands for Spain's King Philip II. Coligny was planning to help Dutch Protestants fight the Spanish, so Alba had a motive. And then there's the traditional suspect, Catherine de Medici herself.
Right. The idea being she feared Coligny was getting too much influence over her son, King Charles IX.
Exactly, and that he might drag France into a war with Spain, which she desperately wanted to avoid. So was the Guises, Alda, Catherine, or some combination? It's still debated. How much was planned and how much was just chaos erupting?
Regardless of who ordered the shot, the result was immediate crisis. Fear just gripped Paris. Fear of Huguenot retaliation for the attack on Coligny. And in that panic, King Charles IX makes this terrible decision. He orders the killing of a specific list of Huguenot leaders. Preemptive strike, you could call it.
And the signal to start the killing. Probably the ringing of the church bells for matins, the early morning prayers, sometime between midnight and dawn from Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, right near the Louvre Bell.
And then it begins.
It's just horrific. Swiss guards drag Protestant nobles out of the Louvre, killed them in the streets. Admiral Coligny himself, still wounded in bed, is killed. They threw his body out of the window. And then the violence just spreads like wildfire. Ordinary Parisians join in, hunting down Protestants, men, women, children. They block streets with chains. It was mob violence unleashed.
Total chaos. Bodies piled up, thrown into the Seine River. Just unimaginable.
This went on in Paris for 3 days. 3 days of slaughter, even though the king apparently tried to call a halt to it at some point. It was out of control.
And it didn't stop at Paris, did it?
No, sadly not. News traveled. And from August through to October, similar massacres erupted in maybe a dozen other cities across France. Toulouse, Lyon, Rouen, Orléans. The violence just spread.
But the estimates, how many people died?
The numbers vary wildly. Some older sources say up to 70,000. Modern historians tend to estimate somewhere between 5,000 and 30,000 across all of France. Still a staggering number.
Yeah.
We have these grim records, like Paris paying workers to bury 1,100 bodies pulled from the Seine in just 1 week. Or reports from Lyon that so many corpses floated down the Rhone River, people avoided drinking the water for months. It's just visceral.
And the survivors, what happened to them?
Many faced a stark choice. Convert to Catholicism, at least outwardly, or flee France entirely. Emigrate. The two top Huguenots, Henry of Navarre, the groom, and the Prince of Condé, they were spared. But only because they pledged to convert to Catholicism right there under duress.
Wow, did they stick with it?
No. As soon as they managed to escape Paris later, they renounced Catholicism and rejoined the Protestant cause.
Amidst all this horror, what about Margaret, the bride?
Her role is actually quite remarkable. Margaret of Valois, she acted courageously. She apparently saved several prominent Protestants, hiding them in her apartments at the Louvre, refusing entry to the killers. And her memoirs, which she wrote later, they provide the only eyewitness account we have from inside the royal family during the massacre. It's an incredibly valuable and very human perspective on the chaos.
That's incredible bravery in that situation.
Yeah.
What about the reactions elsewhere? How did Europe respond?
The reactions were completely divided. Polar opposites, really. In Rome, Pope Gregory III celebrated. He ordered a Te Deum, a hymn of thanksgiving, to be sung. He even had a medal-struck motto, "Overthrow of the Huguenots, 1572.
Seriously, a medal?
Yes. And commissioned frescoes in the Vatican showing the events, including Coligny's death, almost like divine justice.
Oh, that's something.
But then you have someone like the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II. He was Charles IX's father-in-law, remember? He was absolutely horrified, called it a shameful bloodbath.
So divine justice versus shameful bloodbath. It really shows that deep, deep divide in Europe at the time, doesn't it? How differently people saw the same horrific event.
Absolutely. Based entirely on their religious and political viewpoint.
That contrast, that idea of perspective, brings us nicely to the painting. One morning at the gates of the Louvre, painted much later, in 1880, by Édouard Debat-Ponsan. It's such a powerful image. Catherine de Medici, all in black, looking so calm, almost detached, viewing this heap of bodies. It's chilling.
It really is. And Debat-Ponsan, the artist, He was an academic painter, but also a Republican, someone who'd fought in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. So while the painting depicts the historical event of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, it's very likely it also carried a sort of veiled commentary for its contemporary audience.
On more recent events.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
Particularly the bloody suppression of the Paris Commune in 1871, which was still fresh in people's minds, using the past to comment on the present. Yeah.
Interesting. So it's history, but maybe with a political edge for its own time.
Exactly. A subtle layer of meaning there.
And what about the main players? Henry and Margaret, what happened to them after all this?
Well, their marriage, maybe unsurprisingly, wasn't happy. It was childless. Margaret eventually spent about 20 years in exile from the court. That's actually when she wrote her memoirs.
Okay. During the exile?
Yes. Their marriage was finally annulled in 1599. That was after Henry had already become King Henry IV of France. He then married Marie de Medici.
So Henry becomes king. How does that happen after everything?
Well, he becomes heir to the throne, but faced huge opposition from Catholics. He eventually converted to Catholicism, famously saying Paris is well worth a mass. A very pragmatic move.
That sounds like him.
Right. And as King Henry I, the first Bourbon king, he really worked to restore order after decades of war. His most famous act is probably the Edict of Nantes in 1598. This granted substantial rights and religious liberties to Protestants, effectively ending the French wars of religion. A landmark achievement.
A huge step towards tolerance, finally.
A huge step. Though tragically, the peace wasn't absolute. Henry V himself was assassinated in 1610 by a Catholic fanatic. Shows those divisions still ran incredibly deep.
A grim end. And Margaret's reputation, how is she remembered?
Well, her image got significantly shaped, maybe distorted by fiction later on. That famous nickname, La Reine Margot, that wasn't from her time. It was invented by Alexandre Dumas, the author of The Three Musketeers, for his novel, Queen Margot, in 1845.
Dumas.
Yeah. And his novel portrayed her as, well, quite scandalous, promiscuous, even hints of incest. It created this sort of mythical, highly sexualized image that overshadowed the real, complex historical figure.
So fiction kind of took over from fact, a classic case of historical reputation being reshaped by popular culture.
Precisely. Sensationalism often wins out over nuance, unfortunately.
So we've really gone deep today into this incredibly pivotal, violent moment. From Catherine de Medici's high-stakes political games to that doomed wedding meant for peace, which unleashed such horror. Margaret's bravery and her unique account. Henry's journey to king and the Edict of Nantes. It's just such a powerful story about how personal lives, politics, and religion can intertwine in the most, well, explosive ways. It left a massive scar on France and Europe.
It really did. And if you think about the bigger picture, it makes you ask, what can this event, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and how it's been remembered through history, through art like that painting, what can it tell us today about how societies deal with deep divisions, how fragile peace can be? It's quite a sobering lesson, isn't it, about that thin line between unity and chaos and, well, the human capacity for both incredible hope and terrible darkness.